Well, the Cleveland Browns have moved on from quarterback Kenny Pickett. We're certainly going to break into that. The Cleveland Browns have their first and initial 53-man roster. Not a ton of surprises, but certainly some things that can lead to some talking points. All of that coming up next. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd, and we appreciate each and every one of you that come out to the OBR every day for your favorite Cleveland Browns content. While you're at theobr.com this time of year, we highly suggest, heck, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, you need to look into the VIP package. There are cuts that happened yesterday. There are moves that happened today that if you have access to the VIP package here at theobr.com would not have surprised you. So gift it to a friend, tell a friend, take their phone and sign up for them. You have the Ask the Insiders forum. You have the Insiders forum. Your subscription gets bundled with a subscription to Paramount Plus, which will now have the streaming access of all the big UFC fights. The support for all of you, for us, from all of you, for the OBR streaming network has been fantastic. Um, in my time here now, coming over in January, I am absolutely amazed by the growth of where we were and where we are now. It is certainly due to the work and the effort of a lot of people here at the OBR. But as we will always tell you, none of this means anything without you all coming out to support and certainly to watch, subscribe to the OBR on YouTube, subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. The news came last evening, and the Browns traded Kenny Pickett to the Las Vegas Raiders for a fifth-round pick in the 2026 NFL Draft. The Cleveland Browns now hold 10 selections in the 2026 NFL Draft, which ironically enough will be hosted in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's interesting and difficult to kind of say how this would have went for Kenny Pickett in Cleveland if he didn't essentially end up missing almost all of training camp. Kenny Pickett on what was, a nice little, pull, if you want to say a read option type of run. I believe the date was July 26th. And, Kenny ran around the right side for what appeared to be a nice run. Later on in practice, something that was not videoed by anyone, it was another run. And, Kenny just wasn't right at that point. And certainly an issue with the hamstring kept him out of all the preseason games, kept him out of almost all of the practices. There was some 7-on-7 work, which I think people viewed as maybe a positive sign, which wasn't necessarily a positive sign. It was really something that Kenny could do that, would be considered rehabbing. Never really kind of got back to where he needed to be. The Browns announced last week that he was not going to play in the preseason finale. And I think some were, is it the injury? Is it possible that there is interest in Kenny from other teams? And you certainly didn't want to risk him re-aggravating the hamstring injury. So certainly a lot went on. And you have to, kind of feel for Kenny. He truly never got the opportunity because there's been so much talk, and it's certainly probably with Shedeur Sanders related about, whether or not this was an open competition. I've said, and I maintain to continue to say, there were two competitions between Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett about who was going to get the call to initially be the starting quarterback for this team. And then there was the competition between Dillon, Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders as far as who was going to be the rookie who was higher up in the pecking order. All three quarterbacks, besides Joe Flacco, missed time. As we said, Kenny missed a month. Dillon, it was over a week. Shedeur, it was a little over a week. There was no surprise that Joe Flacco ended up being named the starter. He didn't necessarily compete with Kenny Pickett because Kenny couldn't compete, and Joe was never competing against the rookies for the starting gig. And Joe was the one that remained healthy and, took close to most of the reps all summer long. And I think there was just this comfortable feeling with Joe there, certainly with a layover from him being part of this team in 2023. Certainly a lot of moving parts and, certainly some tweaks and differences within the offensive system in 2025 here today, as opposed to the system that Joe Flacco went on that magical run in 2023. But there was no question. Now, for Kenny, I think a lot of people thought because he was the first quarterback brought in the offseason, there was a clear and direct path. And maybe there could have been. And we know the Browns didn't hide what they felt about Kenny. They truly spoke extremely high of him. The quarterback series, it was extremely obvious that the Cleveland Browns, thought that maybe, they could get Kenny to where he could at least be, an average starter within the league. But again, Kenny just never got that opportunity. And I think with Kenny never getting an opportunity to really do much this summer, it kind of opened up everyone within the coaching staff, certainly within the front office's eyes to the rookies. And, you really just paid more attention to them because you really knew at that point, once Kenny wasn't going to be able to, do much in the summer, that it was going to be Joe was going to start. And then you were just really dedicating your eyes day in and day out to Dillon, Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. So Kenny moves on, certainly going to Las Vegas, he's in a really tough path because I think there could have been an opportunity at some point if he had stayed in Cleveland, that if Joe wasn't playing well, they could have called Kenny's number. I think the Browns kind of felt that maybe if Joe wasn't going to get it done with this team, Kenny maybe wasn't going to give him much more of a better chance to be competitive, which is why the trade maybe was appealing to them. He goes to Las Vegas, and I think the road to actually getting the start is even more difficult because I think the only path to him starting in Las Vegas is if Geno Smith goes down. And Geno has been a pretty sturdy quarterback since he got to Seattle and has gone on this nice run to resurrect his own career. I always say everybody wants to call it the next Sam Darnold. Actually, it was the next Geno Smith was the one who kind of did it, as Geno was on several teams before he finally settled in Seattle and just, really, really put it together for himself. So Pickett's moved. The Browns in that deal obviously gave up a draft choice, a fifth-round pick in DTR to get Kenny Pickett. DTR didn't make the Philadelphia Eagles. So, that trade now basically is squashed. The Browns able to get back the fifth-round pick they sent to Philadelphia. Would I rather have the Las Vegas Raiders fifth-round pick this year or the Philadelphia Eagles fifth-round pick this year? Obviously, I would rather have the Las Vegas Raiders fifth-round pick. The tendency there is that it would be higher, of course. I did mention on Sunday, where I was talking about what Dillon Gabriel had done over the last 2 weeks. I think his growth, his maturation, the fact that, I was one that wanted Shedeur to get a bigger opportunity. You guys don't know that. I'm not hiding it. Um, but I can't ignore what Dillon did. And, the exponential growth for Dillon Gabriel from the preseason game in Philadelphia to the preseason game at home against the Rams. Dillon really, you could tell, put in the work, really put in the effort, and was really starting to pick the system up. Some of these completions against the Rams, these balls were let go before the receiver had even made their break. Showed that Dillon was really grasping the system, really knew where guys were supposed to be. And it certainly gives some credit, to the skill players because they were running the correct routes. I mean, sometimes it takes blind faith as a quarterback that your guy is going to run the route that he is supposed to run, but you can't, play with the assumption of he's not going to be there. You have to play with the he's running the route he's supposed to run. He's running the route that was called. And you really, really saw it from Dillon. And he really just kind of settled in. I said on Sunday, I think Dillon Gabriel ended up playing, and where we should look at him now is closer to being the backup quarterback than closer to possibly being in a competition with Shedeur Sanders. And, to his credit, and again, I got hung up on some of the wrong things, size, things of that nature. And, you're not always going to, in your evaluation process, be right. Sometimes in an evaluation process, you can get yourself stuck on something and you think it's a big deal. But at the end of the day, maybe it's not a big deal in any way whatsoever. And maybe that's kind of, maybe where I, to this point, erred on Dillon Gabriel. A lot of this, of course, would come down to what Dillon Gabriel does in the eventual opportunity he gets to play in the regular season. But to this point, certainly Dillon Gabriel is past what my thoughts and beliefs were of him. But Kenny Pickett, it was a quick 5-month relationship between the Browns and Kenny. And now Kenny Pickett in his 4th NFL season will now be on his 4th NFL team. The Browns have released their first 53-man roster. This is Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. Please make sure if you're listening and you're enjoying, leave us some comments. Of course, subscribe to the page. A lot more coming. And, this time of year, the excitement, the anticipation just kind of gets us all with our juices flowing. Original 53-man roster that took the practice field today. Browns are going to keep 3 quarterbacks, as we all know. Joe Flacco is your starter. Dillon Gabriel right now is your number 2 quarterback. And Shedeur Sanders, as much as everybody wanted the Browns to get him out of here, which was foolish, Shedeur Sanders is going to remain. The Browns like what Shedeur did. Saturday notwithstanding, the Browns have faith in Shedeur Sanders. Puzzling for the time being, and if you were going to put an asterisk next to it, I would highly recommend that. The Browns with currently 2 running backs on the roster, Jerome Ford and, of course, Dillon Sampson. Now, there's certainly a lot of talk and wondering just where this team is at, of course, with Quinshon Judkins. My guess is there is some movement. Does that mean it's coming anytime soon? I can't guarantee that. Do I think it's coming relatively soon? I think there might be some traction there. I think a lot of people, even with the assumption that there could be some league discipline in Quinshon Judkins, I think you people are assuming a number that could be higher than it would be. Mike Hall pleaded down the charges and ended up pleading guilty for his involvement in his situation last summer. That is kind of what led to the length of Mike's suspension last year. There's nothing for Quinshon Judkins to plead down to. The charges are completely dropped. So even if there is some sort of discipline from the league, my guess it's going to be a significantly lower number than what Mike Hall received. Maybe 1 game, maybe 2 max. Of course, Audric Estime is a name that's hanging out there. And look, a lot of Browns fans love them some Audric Estime. Yes, he ran a 4.7 at the combine. I think a lot of people felt that meant he lacked explosion. A 38-inch vertical jump at the combine told me that doesn't lack explosion. Maybe he lacks long speed. Good feet, good quickness. I think he can run well within the wide zone scheme if the Browns do, in fact, target him. So certainly a guy to look after. He was jumping over defenders at Notre Dame. His final 2 seasons there, I think he ended up running for almost 2,400 yards. I believe the number was like 25 touchdowns in his final 2 years. He's certainly a guy I would look at. And, I think it kind of paints a picture of what an analytic backfield would look like with, not spending all the money on one guy like the Browns did with Nick Chubb, and rightfully so, but it may not have been the overall analytic approach. The analytic approach would having 3 backs that you all have faith in, understanding the attrition at the position, and hoping that you probably have 2 of your top 3 each week, which gives you the best, opportunity to perform and perform well. But somebody's coming. Somebody's coming to that running back room. Whether it is the signing of Quinshon Judkins, whether it is, the claiming of an Audric Estime, or maybe even both. Wide receiver, I think we all, kind of had a good idea where this was going, and then it got a little wonky last evening. We knew Isaiah Bond, DeAndre Carter, Jerry Jeudy, and Jamari Thrash were going to meet. We knew Cedric Tillman, Jamari Thrash, Jerry Jeudy, and Isaiah Bond were going to make this team. Last night, there was a leak that maybe DeAndre Carter was being released. Then today, DeAndre Carter was staying. For me, there were 3 guys for 2 spots. And I'll be honest, all I wanted to know is that Gage Lavardane was going to be the one that was going to stick around. Look, when you have a guy like that who did everything you asked for this summer, showed you ability in the return game, showed you ability as a receiver, showed you the ability with the ball in his hands as he did on jet sweeps, for me, it was really hard to look at a guy like Gage Lavardane and say, you're not part of this team. Now, the thing with Deontay Johnson, Jamari Thrash just outplayed him this year. this summer. There's no question about it. And when I spoke yesterday with Jacob Roche, and by the way, Thursday's episode of Browns 3D will be Jacob Roche hosting alone. I will be moving my daughter to college. Sure, I'll be peeking around and I'll nose around, see what's going on. But, it is definitely a day where, me and my wife are going to enjoy ourselves as a family with my older daughter and certainly my younger daughter, 1 year behind my older daughter in tow as we move our firstborn into her, I guess, first home away from home. So Jacob Roche will man Browns 3D for you all on Thursday. So Deontay Johnson, when we had the discussion yesterday, Jacob and I, the question was, for me, if we're even questioning whether or not Deontay Johnson has made this roster, that felt like it was the ultimate answer to the question. Obviously, he had not done enough. Deontay Johnson needed to look like the second best wide receiver on this roster all summer long, and he just didn't. Jamari Thresh looked better. Gage Lavardane, for his age, showed a lot of promise. And what do you do with a guy who's 29 and no disrespect to Deontay Johnson whatsoever? Whatever his issues were outside of coming to the Browns, Deontay Johnson carried himself this summer like a pro. But you possibly were going to get to this weird situation, and the Browns really don't run a lot of four wide receiver sets unless they go empty because David Njoku doesn't necessarily come off the field. You would have been in a scenario with a 29-year-old guy at wide receiver, a one-time All-Pro who wasn't getting a lot of snaps. It's just a weird position. Deontay Johnson doesn't play special teams. He wasn't going to start playing special teams at 29. So I think the Browns said with Lavardane's ability to play special teams, DeAndre Carter, and if they still want to move on with Carter because they find a wide receiver out there with more promise at actually playing wide receiver, I'm okay with it. But I think the fact that Carter could play wide receiver if you needed him to, in a pinch, and maybe not great, and does give you return ability, that just gave you the trump where Deontay Johnson was in a really, really tough spot. And the Browns ultimately decided that Deontay Johnson, just didn't do enough to make this team. And I can't argue that rationale. I just can't. The tight end position, David Njoku, obviously, Harold Fannin, Blake Whiteheart is here with an injury of his knee. And of course, they also brought in, and kept to the 53 Brendan Bates. I don't think four tight ends are the way the Browns wanted to go. I think the Browns like Blake Whiteheart. I think the Browns are not sure if Blake Whiteheart will be ready to go week one against Cincinnati Bengals. And I think they felt the next guy would be Brendan Bates. And this could change. It really feels that if the Browns were to make a move or two, maybe there is a cut coming at tight end. You could move on from either, Whiteheart or Brendan Bates if there's another tight end that has more appeal. So, definitely a position to watch for, future movement there. The offensive line. Now, of course, there was a move today. The Browns traded a 2028 seventh round pick to the Los Angeles Rams for offensive tackle KT Leviston. Now, Leviston was just in Cleveland over the weekend, played every snap at left tackle for the Los Angeles Rams, played every snap at left tackle for the Los Angeles Rams the entire summer. Browns certainly had a firsthand look at him on Saturday. Certainly was interesting that a guy in Los Angeles was able to be in Cleveland today for practice. So, maybe this deal was sitting there in the works the entire time. And maybe it was something between the Browns and the Rams where, hey, just let him stay here. If we can work out the deal, we'll do it. Or the Rams were maybe just going to cut him. So the Browns go ahead and make that deal. But your 10 offensive linemen, obviously your starting offensive line, DeJuan Jones, Joe Batonio, Ethan Posick, of course, currently injured, did not practice today, Wyatt Teller, Jack Conklin. DeJuan Jones as a reserve, Zach Zinter as a reserve, Luke Whippler as a reserve, Tevin Jenkins as a reserve, and Cornelius Lucas as well. So that is your starting offensive line. So your backup tackles, of course, are now KT Leviston and Cornelius Lucas. Your guards, Jenkins and Zinter. Your backup center, of course, Luke Whippler, who had a really strong summer. And good for Luke because it's really been tough for Luke, missing most of both the first 2 years and finally got an opportunity and has looked pretty good for this team. And with the current situation with Ethan Posick, who knows? Luke Whippler could possibly be starting at center for the Browns week 1 against Cincinnati Bengals. Defensive line, and certainly some good news there. Mike Hall has now passed a physical. So Mike Hall, who did not practice today, and passing the physical does not necessarily mean that Mike Hall is right out the box ready to go. It means he has passed his physical and he can start returning to practice. So it's going to be a ease in and start to ramp him up as you feel he is capable, of course, for Mike Hall. But, Myles Garrett, Isaiah McGuire, Alex Wright, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Cam Thomas. It's kind of where we figured it was going to go with the 5 DNs. Really nice group. You had to move on from a couple guys that certainly showed some promise and played well this summer, but I think the Browns got the top 5 right. Defensive tackles, Mason Graham, Shelby Harris, Malik Collins, Mike Hall Jr., and the summer sensation, Aiden Huntington. This group has one thing in common, whether it's guys on the inside or whether it's guys on the outside. Any one of these 10 guys can get after the quarterback. The Browns really, really kept 10 guys who have pass rush ability. Certainly going to have to be stout against the run to get yourselves into those obvious pass situations for the opposing offense. But this group is certainly going to be able to get after the quarterback. The linebackers, they kept 5. Carson Schlesinger, Devin Bush, Mahmoud Diabate. Of course, Jerome Baker is here, the local guy. And Easton Mascarenas Arnold. Hey, Macarena. There's only 5 of them. And I think some people might be speculating on whether or not the Browns could move on. You're not going to keep 4. 4 is a light number. Maybe they bring in a linebacker. I don't know necessarily that. And one of these 5 guys is going to get, booted off the 53-man roster. Certainly Schlesinger is your highlight here. Phenomenal summer. Certainly a surprising pick when it was made, but as things unfolded over the next couple of months, and then right before as training camp was starting, with the JOK news, and then right as camp was starting, of course, Jordan Hicks retiring, Carson Schlesinger all of a sudden, basically went from a really nice looking second round pick at 33 overall to, hey, here's the green dot. You're basically calling this defense. And we've seen it all summer. Anytime you see something go on with this defense, or you see somebody around a guy with the ball, it is usually Carson Schlesinger. Defensive backs, right now, I don't know if, this cornerback room is anything that's just going to, give you recommendations of prime Deion Sanders or, Eric Allen or Aeneas Williams, any fantastic cornerback that you ever thought existed. But of course, it is Denzel Ward. It is Greg Newsome. It is Cameron Mitchell and Dom Jones and Miles Harden. I think the Browns are hoping with just more playing time, Miles Harden can maybe develop into something. I think they really like Dom Jones from the standpoint of he kind of maybe gives them somebody who kind of resembles Martin Emerson as far as size and length. So certainly somebody that could possibly, factor in pretty highly here, of course, for playing time. As somebody sees an opportunity at the nickel, does Greg Newsome in early downs play on the outside? And then maybe does Greg Newsome kick inside because they know he can do it and they know he can do it pretty well? All things certainly to, consider. Your safeties, Grant Delpit, Ronnie Hickman, Rayshawn Jenkins, DeMonte Casey, and Donovan McMillan, undrafted free agent out of Pitt. I'm really excited about the Donovan McMillan one. Certainly played a boatload of specials all summer. Usually bodes well for a guy who plays a lot of specials. But I mean, just out there in that number 31 jersey, full legit size, well-sized safety, had over 100 tackles his final season at Pitt. Really good player. Really, really impressive player at Pitt. Probably carried a draftable grade. I think he ran in the 4.4s. It was very confusing that maybe somebody on day 3, with all the need for safety help within the league, didn't have enough interest to throw a pick at Donovan Mitchell. I mean, Donovan McMillan. Damn it, Mary Kay, you did it to me. That's your Browns 53. Of course, I do think there's more coming, and certain, I don't think this team is going to go into Cincinnati week with only 2 running backs on the roster. I don't think this team is necessarily sold at that cornerback room the way it currently is. 5 safeties does seem like a large amount of safety numbers of safeties to keep. So you wonder, where the dominoes are going to fall here over the next couple of days. I like where this team is at. I told you on Sunday, I think that this team, in my opinion, right now, I feel better about this team than I certainly did when training camp began. Some of it certainly has to do with health, that a lot of guys just, who have had health questions in the past, that's just not the case right now. I think, you're hoping that this offensive line outside of Ethan Posick collectively, just because they're playing together and seem to be healthy, the play should be improved. I'm not saying the play of this offensive line is going to go back to being league dominant like it used to be, but I certainly think the offensive line should play better. A, just because everybody is playing together and you're playing your top players, and B, because, it seems everybody's in pretty good health. It seems everybody maybe lost a couple of pounds, and that certainly could have been the tutelage of a new offensive line coach looking at this line and trying to figure out what was best for them, and maybe understanding that they're getting a little bit older. So maybe getting a couple of LBs off them, was a positive avenue to go with this group. We'll see. I certainly think it, leads to maybe a blueprint that should lead for a more successful group. Joe manning this offense, and, I don't know if any of us know what the true expectations are for Joe as far as, what he can do, how much he can lead, all those things you think like he could be successful at. But this team has a really tough stretch of their first 6 games. They're playing some talented football teams. I think in the first 6 games, there's only one team that did not make the playoffs last year. So, it would be the case of, Joe Flacco maybe again playing, some inspired storybook football later in his career. But this team, if they can be competitive or even possibly successful in the early part of the season, it could be a story about, some kids really stepping up. This team kept a good amount of undrafted free agents. This team has their first legitimate draft class for the first time since the Deshaun Watson trade. We got, a week and change away from the opener against the Bengals. But, I think this team, is better than I anticipated they would be. Do they have questions? Sure. Lots of teams have questions. You know, do you necessarily want to have questions about your cornerback room? No. But if this defensive line is able to get after quarterbacks, pressure quarterbacks, sack quarterbacks, run quarterbacks out of bounds, make them throw the ball either away or throw it, into the dirt, that certainly is something that can help this secondary, keep their heads above water. No doubt. I think the linebackers are going to be fun. This defensive line, I think this defensive line is going to be bananas. I think the potential of the 2025 pass rush right now could exceed what we all enjoyed in 2023 with that pass rush. That's a legit thing. I truly believe that. So I really like where the team is at. When we sit down 24 hours from now and have this conversation, there's probably going to be some new blood that we can talk about, and maybe yet again some more changes, to this first 53, as we will probably have a second 53 tomorrow. As always, we appreciate you all for coming out to the OBR.com every single day for your favorite Cleveland Browns content. Our writers do a great job. You guys show them a lot of love, as you should. Get the VIP package. It will give you the insider forums. It will give you the Ask the Insiders. And of course, it is bundled with subscription to Paramount Plus, which will allow you to, stream all the big UFC events as they are doing away from pay-per-views. That's a BOGO, baby. That is definitely a BOGO. The support here that you all give us for the OBR streaming network is tremendous. Again, I could not be more, stoked and excited and geeked about the growth when we started this journey. When I came aboard here, they wanted to put a little more content out. I needed somewhere to put my content out. And the growth that we have done since, joining forces in January has just been tremendous. Some great workers and content creators here at the OBR. And I'm glad to just be, my small part of it all as well. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. And we will talk to you all tomorrow.